Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Welcome back to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. Today, you're just going to have me, and if you don't remember who I am, I'm Hannah O'Brien. I'm both a veteran spouse myself and the program director for the Veteran Spouse Network, and then, of course, a host of this lovely podcast. It's November. This is the month, right? This is the month that not only Veterans Day falls under, or if you live in my house, the Marine Corps birthday, equally as important. But it is also Military and Veteran Families Month. And again, let's just face it, this is when our community really gets the most attention from the civilian world, whether that's how it should be or not. And so we thought we'd take advantage of that by discussing an issue that we at the Veteran Spouse Network are fierce advocates for. And that is honoring this community's unique differences while being able to maintain inclusivity and celebrating our commonalities. That's really what we're all about here at the VSN. So what do I mean by that? Well, just like our country, the military is a melting pot. It's one of the clearest places where you can see that all these people coming from different backgrounds and experiences, which is what makes it such an incredible community, and bridging our differences for the pursuit of that common mission. And while we see these commonalities celebrated in this community as they should be, we also all too often see a lot of division and segmentation. We hear it all the time just in interactions between different members of this community. You might hear like, I'm from a Marine family. Oh, you're Air Force? Cool. And if you could see my face, you'd see that I'm mimicking judgment or a sense of betterment, not because I feel that way myself, but because we've seen those reactions. We've heard them. We've been on the other side of them. You'll hear like, well, did you deploy? Oh, only once? My veteran did 7 tours. You didn't see combat? You served in peacetime? Did your spouse retire? Oh, they got out in 4. Well, were they injured? Are they 100% PNT? Oh, only 70%? And then on the spouse side, a lot of times you'll hear stuff like, are you a full-time caregiver for your veteran? Were you with your partner while they were actively serving? Do they have PTSD? And the list goes on and on. We hear those questions, and there is like some of this natural comparison of situations. Um, and that's not to say that those differences aren't valid. Um, everyone's experiences are unique. Just the fact that we are military or veteran connected or families, our experiences are still vastly unique and different, and that is critical to be aware of. And that should be acknowledged and honored, especially in the service of providing tailored and quality support. But we also have to be mindful of the division and the isolation that that division can create, which doesn't do any of us any good. And so that's what I really wanted to kind of talk about today, both from the sense of like how we've kind of embedded that into how we do the work that we do and we create programming, and how we see that show up in our community, as well as kind of talk about, when it really, from our experience, and that's all I can speak to of our experience as an organization working with spouses and families across the country, when we've seen it really be beneficial and supportive to bring groups together and focus on those commonalities and try and stay away from the division, the segmentation. And then simultaneously, where it's really critical that you honor those unique experiences when that really needs attention to be in service of the individual who is experiencing those, challenges or just journeys on life. Because and it's a balance, right? And sometimes it's a hard balance to figure out when to come together and when to separate. And there's no blueprint. I'll make that much clearer. And it might not work for every single person every time, because I can tell you we certainly have people coming to us all the time, like requesting certain specific topics discussed with certain specific groups. And sometimes it's not us being like, no, we don't see value in that. But additionally, the further we segment, the more, I mean, just by virtue of segmentation and kind of diving, or whatever, drilling down further and further on segmentation, there are less of you, right? The more similar we need experiences to be, the less community we will find, the less support we will find. Because I think the thing we have to remind ourselves at the end of the day is no one has the same experience as you do. And if we're looking for that, we're not going to find it. And so it's trying to figure out how to reach this community in a way that feels, again, like you're honoring those differences, you're holding space for that, but where you're coming together to celebrate the commonalities. Because when you can do that, you create this larger community of support. And that's really what we're about at the VSN is creating that community of support so that people feel less alone in their experiences, right? If I'm looking for those people who are just like me, I won't find any support. Or, okay, I found this person and I can trust this one person, but what happens when they're not available to me? And at the end of the day, what we want to do, and I think what most people want, right, is to have that support system in place. Those people they can turn to who can understand to some degree what they're going through. Um, and the wider we can stretch ourselves with that, the more support we'll have. And really, again, that's what it's all about. That's what we're certainly all about at the BSN. And so I wanted to be able to kind of talk about how we have learned the importance of that and kind of worked through that in our own now, almost 8 years, or I'm sorry, really, can I do basic math? 8 years of running programming for this community. And so, I won't assume that everyone listening knows what we do at the Veteran Spouse Network outside of this podcast. So to tell just a tiny bit about us, so it's not repetitive for someone who does, we provide peer support programming to military and veteran spouses and family members, to include like individuals who are divorced or widowed from a service member or veterans. And we've been running peer support groups specifically since 2018. And the one clear thing we have found is that peer support helps people feel less alone. That is so often the quotes, whatever, the when we ask people, why they're coming to us and what they're hoping to get out of this, they're expressing that overwhelmingly so that they feel alone in their experience, that they don't feel like they have anyone that who they feel comfortable talking to, getting support from, who understands what they're going through, and that has made them feel isolated and alone. And then what we hear overwhelmingly after few participants have engaged in our programming is, wow, I'm not alone. There are a lot of other people going through, walking this path, and they don't have the same experiences of me as I do. But, having these realizations personally myself when I finally was able to connect to this community after struggling and looking for people who got it. There is so much more commonality than not. Um, and it's so powerful when we can get in a room of other people and share, you know, our stories, share our challenges, share some of the most difficult things that we are going through and navigating in our lives, in our relationships, and in our families, and be met with people just shaking their heads, that, yeah, get it. I've been there. I am there. There's hope. Or, yeah, I am there too. What do we do? And more than anything, we know that those those shaking heads are not judging us. We all like to think that everyone in our life always has the best interests, our best interests at heart and wants to be supportive. But there is a really big disconnect when we're trying to support people and we don't understand what they're doing or we think we know best. That even if we think we're coming off in a supportive way, like it can feel really judgmental. It can feel really like, wow, you don't get this at all. You don't get me at all. You don't get what I'm dealing with or what I'm asking for from you, as a person in my life who I need support from. And the more times that happens, the more the less likely we are to go to you in the future, and therefore the more isolated we become. And so when you can get in front of these group of peers, see those shaking heads, know that people are like, yes, that is it. Um, and there aren't those, well, have you thought about insert unsolicited advice or judgmental question or statement? Um, that is powerful. And a lot of times that's all we need to feel supported. Um, and feeling supported can help us be in a mental space to be able to tackle the challenges in our lives. But when you feel alone, everything is bigger, everything is harder. Um, and you feel set back. Anyway, see, I'm relating. You know, guys, I get peer support from being a part of this community. I think I've said on this podcast, I certainly have in other settings that like I don't know that I'd be where I am in my marriage, my relationship with my husband if it hadn't been for this job. And I say this job because it's my job, you know, that's what happened. That's how I got connected to this community was through the work that I do. Um, Helping build programs to create these types of supportive communities. But it's so much more than a job, and it's not the job that um, helped me get to the place where I am in my marriage. It was the community that came from the job. It was being able to sit in those rooms and feel seen and feel heard and feel validated and to hear others' stories, others' challenges, others' successes, others' strategies, others' resources, right? That I could relate to. Because even when we couldn't relate there to the exact whatever, you know, situation, um, we still could relate because there was so much commonality there. There was more than enough to bridge any divides. Um, and I think sometimes, you know, kind of what I was wanting to address through this topic is sometimes when we're more focused on the division, the divides, the comparisons, we miss out on that support and we don't realize really how much we have in common. And you know, I'm not I'm not going to pretend that this is a unique um sentiment or philosophy or whatever to this community. This goes for human existence. You know, we too, I think all too often we're focused on division and what separates us, and we miss out on all the commonalities that we share and ways to come together. Um, but anyway, I digress. So, kind of getting back to how we implement this in our programming, um, is we try to focus on the commonalities while understanding and acknowledging the differences in our population and designing programs with this in mind. Um, so how do we do that? Well, we do this with our population, alongside our population, our community, to ensure we're not making decisions for them, but with them, right? Like, yes, the vast majority of our staff are members of this community. And just like many members of this community wear different hats. So we have veterans on our staff, we have spouses, active duty spouses, veteran spouses, children of veterans. We have those who, like myself, met their veteran after service had ended, and those who, were with their partner the entire time through a 20-year career um, in active duty life. We have parents and non-parents. We really have a diverse staff. We didn't always, we were a much smaller staff when we started this thing, but we have a diverse staff, but we're still just a very small subset of this larger, diverse community. So we have an approach which is called human-centered design. And that's really where you are, I mean, it says what it is, right? It's centered around the human, the person receiving said service or product or whatever, because it goes beyond services. But we're focused on that human element and designing programming around them. So we ask our community what they need, and then we actually listen and use that to make decisions about the program. Um, and I think this has really benefited us. There, I can think of one time where we didn't do this, where we thought we had had enough, feedback just from other programming that we were running that we thought oh, it's very clear there needs to be a program on this. And we tried, and I'll even say it was a transition. So helping spouses, supporting spouses while their service member was transitioning out of the military. And this program really didn't take off. And we worked at it and we pivoted and we tried to do things differently for about 2 years. And I always think back to the one thing we did different was assume that this was something they wanted and needed and would benefit from, instead of starting with that conversation. And that's not to say that that's all that was going on. I think we learned a lot of other things there too. But I feel like we have never failed when we start with the population and we start with talking to them and figuring out their needs and how, not just their needs in terms of what are their experiences and what are they wanting support around, but also like how do they want to receive that support? What does that look like? What's realistic? Um, and building and pivoting around that and then eliciting feedback and making the population a part of that feedback loop, so it's not like, cool, we did it the one time and we're going to run this program the same way for the next 20 years and assume that nothing changed, right? That's not realistic, for anything, certainly not for an ever evolving community, very fast paced evolving community at times, depending on what's going on in the military and in the world. Um, and so having them collecting that data, that feedback, and making the participants a part of that so that you're constantly evolving based on needs. And it doesn't mean programs are changing daily, weekly, even yearly drastically, but it means we know when they need to change. And we know how they need to change because we're hearing it directly from our population. Um, and that I just can't imagine creating programming in any other way. Um, and then kind of taking it back to, when to come together and focus on the commonalities versus when we need to really focus in on and honor those differences. Like that process, that human-centered design process is what helps us understand what those differences are and when they need to be honored. And then we can then start that whole process almost over again about, okay, now we've identified that, you know, I'm going to use this example because it's obvious, although it's not always obvious to everybody. Um, we may in some situations assume like military and veteran spouses are the same. Some people don't even understand what we say when we call someone a veteran spouse. And I'm going to take a second here to explain what we mean by that. But they might say, oh, yeah, they benefit from the same stuff. And the truth is, the experiences aren't the same. And that doesn't mean that there aren't programs and like areas where it actually, I think it's quite beneficial for those communities to come together and receive support together. But again, it's taking that into to account of like, where is it appropriate? Where are those shared commonalities? And that's what we build that shared community, that shared programming on. Um, because, and I guess I'll use this opportunity to talk about it. Like, some people ask us, okay, you call yourself the Veteran Spouse Network. One, what is that? Two, you say you serve military and veteran spouses, partners, family members. So why does your name just say this one thing? And we have maintained this name. I will say originally when we created the Veteran Spouse Network, we really did only serve veteran spouses and partners. Um, and that is a really important title, I guess you'd call it, for us to acknowledge as separate and unique. Because a lot of times military and veteran spouses get lumped into the same terminology, and we're all referred to as military spouses. But what active duty spouses go through, that's a whole different set of experiences than what a veteran spouse goes through. And when we say veteran spouse or veteran partner, that means they are a part of a veteran family. Their service member is no longer a service member, right? This is where it seems really simple to be able to, to talk about it this way. A service member is serving on active duty. They transition out of the military. They are no longer called a service member. They are called a veteran. They get a new title because they have a whole new set of experiences. Um, because it's a stark difference. It's an obvious difference. Why would we not treat their families the same way and honor that that is a difference? Being an active duty spouse is not the same as being a veteran spouse. Being an active duty child is not the same as being a veteran child. And a very important reminder that not all veteran spouses were active duty spouses. Prime example sitting in front of here, you right here. Well, you can't see me, but listening to me. I met my partner after service. Our kids are born after service. I never made the sacrifices that a military spouse makes. Our kids will never make the sacrifices that active duty military kids are asked to make. And as a result, I will never identify as a military spouse. I don't think that's fair. And maybe, some military spouses are out there like, yes, once a military spouse, always well, that's actually different. But like, oh yeah, we're all part of one tribe. Absolutely. I think we are all part of one tribe. And that's where I think we only benefit from coming together. Um, but when this distinction becomes important, is in honoring that those are unique experiences. Active duty spouses are dealing with managing life under the DoD and all the hierarchy and bureaucracy that comes with that, living on base, living off base, having to PCS and how that affects every aspect of life for them, having to manage deployments where their partner is gone for extended periods of time and they are taking on more responsibilities at home when their service member is gone. And that's just the obvious ones. That's just the tip of the iceberg of experiences that active duty spouses are having that veteran spouses like myself are not and will never. And then when we come on to the veteran side of things, A lot happens after transition. There is a lot of change that the veteran is navigating, that the family is navigating. Um, and new issues arise. It's when a lot of the mental health stuff comes out. Um, that's when, issues of purpose, finding purpose in work. Um, and in what, and I'm speaking about things that I've dealt with in my family. And I wasn't even with my husband during those like critical 2 years of transition either. I met him, he had been out for 5 years when we met. But he was still very much navigating, finding his place, finding purpose. And I honestly don't think he really found that. And I think that was a very difficult thing for him mentally that he hadn't found that until he landed on um, being a first responder, a medical EMT, now about to be a paramedic. And that was only a couple years ago. Like you're dealing with that sort of stuff. He was still very much wrestling with his mental health. And let's say we still deal with that. That is still a part of our life. He and we as a couple have taken immense strides to figure out how to manage that in his life and in our relationship and our family. Um, but those were things that came up for him post-service and that come up for a lot of veterans post-service. Um, I've even had active duty spouses kind of look at some of the curriculum and things that we discuss in our veteran spouse resiliency group and be like, whoa, people want to talk about this stuff? Like, are you kidding me? This is invasive. Ooh, you're talking about PTSD and suicidality. And we're like, yeah, we gotta. They need it. We need it. Um, because it's a different set of circumstances and experience. You are living a different life. Um, and then you have the spouses who did active duty life with their partner, transitioned out, and are living post-service life with their partner. And that's a whole unique experience as well. They're different. And so it's important to honor those differences where they matter. For example, when you lump all spouses into one terminology, especially if you're coming from the programming or organizational side of the house. Like we serve military spouses. You might be missing a whole population that you actually aim to serve who assumes that it's not for them because they don't identify as a military spouse. Because I work in this field, I know to look harder at those things to understand, okay, what do they mean by military spouse? Like, is this for me? Um, but that's only because I'm in this field. Like, if I hadn't had that, I would have assumed, oh, they mean active duty spouse, and that's not for me. And I would have been done, like exploring that organization as an option, exploring that service as an option, unless someone told me otherwise. And that sucks. And then it's also important to think about messaging. Because you can even go the other way, right? You can say military and veteran spouses, this is for you, and have that really, and mean it, like it really is for them, and have that really inclusive, obvious language and call to action. But then unfortunately, I've also seen program that says it's designed for people like me. And when I get into it, it's assuming I was an active duty spouse. And a lot of the messaging and a lot of the content is around things that the spouses and partners navigated during active duty life. And so, how do I take that? And I'll speak for my individual, me as an individual post-service spouse. I get mad and I get sad, honestly, too. Why did you say this was for me? This isn't for me. And that makes me think you don't understand me. And if you don't understand me, why would I trust you to support me? If you can't even understand that when you say veteran spouse, you're talking to people who may not have lived active duty life with their partner, then this program wasn't designed for me. And so I don't trust it to benefit me. And y'all, let's just be honest, there are a lot of post-service spouses out there. Some veterans get out when they are quite young. Others may have been in relationships and married, and those relationships did not last, the ones that they had when they were active duty. I am my husband's second marriage. He was married when he was active in the Marines. Um, we hear that story a lot. So there are a lot of us out there, post-service veteran spouses who were not with their partners while they were actively serving. We want to believe that we're a part of this community, and we are. And we benefit from talking to active duty spouses and talking to veteran spouses who were with their partner when they were active. It fills in immense amounts of gaps for us. It is so supportive. And no, they shouldn't exist to support us. But I've seen it work so much the other way too. There's a lot of support to give from post-service spouses to active duty spouses, living this life post-service. It's so bi-directional, the support that we can give to one another when, again, we're able to focus on those commonalities. And so it's really important that we know when and how to do that. And you can only do that by talking to the population, and really making them a part of program design. Because it's not malice when these things get overlooked. It might just be that people have a better understanding of active duty spouse life that are creating programs, or that they involved a bunch of active duty spouses, in creating the program. So there's no surprise that it's more active duty spouse centered because they don't know, they haven't lived that life yet of what happens after service has ended. And vice versa. I can't design a program for active duty spouses on my own. Not a peer support program, because I think it needs to have that level of standing. I need to be engaging with those active duty spouses and a lot of them to understand the diversity of those needs. Because I didn't experience it myself. And again, even if I did, I'm one person with one set of experiences. So I think that's a good reminder for all of us who serve these populations, who work in programming, that we need to understand the population. And we also need to look out for our own blind spots, because a lot of this stuff isn't happening because anyone has bad intentions. This community has the best intentions. Like, this is such a service-driven, passionate community. That's why all these amazing organizations exist. But again, it doesn't mean that we don't have blind spots. It doesn't mean that um, we might miss something, if we're only looking from X lens or Y lens, or only involving a small amount of people in figuring out what something needs to look like. So I guess that's my big spiel of like, we need to understand the population. Programming has to be human-centered to really ensure that it's meeting the needs, because there are those places where you can and should cut across. For instance, I remember when my husband was getting like back into therapy, and I was like, "Hey, I'm in this community. Like, let me, if you're willing, let me help you try and get connected to some therapists. Like, what are you looking for?" And at the time where he was still a little reluctant, he gave me the longest list of requirements, that this therapist would have to have these personal experiences. They have to be a Marine. They have to have seen combat. They have to be post 9/11, and I could go and make some up at this point. But I just remember thinking, that's a really long list. And how many, veterans actually go into the counseling world, the professional helping world, period. And then we talk about the segmentation of branch. service area, um, deployment, not deployment, combat, and then the experiences they had. And so I looked at him and I was like, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but if all of those things are deal breakers for you, then I need you to understand that you're not going to find a therapist. And you're not going to get the support that we both know you need. Um, so let's take it back and let's think about what really is important because I'm all for the commonalities needing to be important. They are. That's literally central to the work that we do with peer support. Um, but this is a large community, but it is a small portion of the community, right? One less than 1% have served. And we need to be open to where those commonalities serve us and where the division does us a disservice. Um, at the end of the day, we need support from one another. And if we're constantly looking for places to divide, those support circles get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But we've done it to ourselves at that point. So I just think it's really important for us to just have these considerations, whether it's at the individual level of like, what are those things that are truly critical to me? Like for me to feel safe and for me to feel that I'm getting the support that I need. What do I need the person on the other end of that or the people on the other end of that? What do I need them to be able to relate to? And if that's a long list, write that long list and then take another look at it and take a look at it through the lens of is this is this realistic or am I honestly selling myself short and I'm not going to be able to find these people and therefore I'm not going to get the support that I say that I need. And same from the programmatic level. Like again, really trying to understand the community and their needs and figuring out when it's valuable to cut across differences, share commonalities, and make that the bedrock of that programming, and when you need to honor differences. And there are a lot of times where you do need to honor differences. And it's also thinking about like not just the audience, but the content. For example, we have a session in our VSRG curriculum called Love and Relationships, and it's all about your intimate partner relationship with your veteran. We talk about communication, we talk about intimacy. Like it is how what's going well, what's not going well in our intimate partner relationships, and what are we wanting to work on, and what can we do as the one person in that relationship. Um, that lands different if it's not a spouse or not a partner is in that room, right? What if I'm the mom of a veteran? You think I want to be talking about the intimacy or the child of an adult child of a veteran? Or what if I've lost my veteran? What if they have passed away? Or what if I'm divorced or separated from my veteran? That's not appropriate content for every group, right? So it's not just looking at who to bring together versus who to separate. I think honestly there are lots of places where we should bring as many people together as possible. But it's also what's the content and who's the appropriate audience for the content, and who's not the appropriate audience for the content. Because a lot of times people say, well, I really want to. And we've even let some people in. We've kind of told them what to expect and let them in and said, okay, if you really think this is going to be supportive, go for it. And then we get that feedback of, oh, shoot, you were right. Like, and we're not always right, but we have gotten that feedback of, oh, darn, yeah, that wasn't it. That wasn't what I needed. And you told me that. But when people really want something, us being able to try and work with them, and just be transparent about it, right? And allowing people to empowering people to make their own decisions about what they would find to be supportive. Um, when and where you can, I think is good as well. Um, but anyway, I feel like I've been droning on and on. So, if you guys have listened to the podcast before, you know that when I have a guest, I usually try to end the session by asking them what it's like one piece of advice or wisdom they'd like to share with our listeners. So today, the message I really want to get across is that, we are all more alike than we think. And again, this is a good message to take in outside of this community, with us every day, honestly, in multitude of situations. And that we should try to look for those commonalities. Just because I wasn't with my husband while he was active duty doesn't mean that I can't be supported by and provide support to a fellow spouse who was. There's so much that we have in common, and so when we choose to lean on those commonalities, then we grow our communities of support, and we can continue to grow our communities of support in ways that honestly we may never have dreamed of. Um, and I think that's really the power of what we try to help facilitate at the Veteran Spouse Network. It's the power that changed my life and my relationship and gave me the family that I have today that I wouldn't trade for the world. Um, and I remember y'all the first I was she's 20 something when I first came into this job, and I was creating programs and I was going to be training these leaders who had all of these experiences that I didn't have. Um, and I felt like, who the frick was I to tell them I know what they need to do? And I remember when we went into our first peer leader training and I was supposed to be leading this thing, I was really intimidated. Um, and oof, I'm getting emotional. Um, the immense amounts of love and support and camaraderie that was in this setting and that they showed me. Um, they wanted to make sure I knew I was a member of this community, no matter the differences in our experiences. And what that did for me in that moment and for the rest of my life, that is the feeling that I hope we create for spouses for the rest of the time that we exist, for family members for the rest of the time that we exist. And I don't think there is any other way to do that and do it well without talking to our populations and understanding the value of bridging together, leaning on those commonalities, and then again, just finding the places where it truly is important to identify and honor differences and create programming for those unique differences. But without the former, without being able to bridge and come together, I may have stayed isolated for years. And so many other spouses may stay isolated. Um, so, and there are lots of us outside of this community who are facing isolation, right? And we could combat that so easily by trying to find the commonalities in our experiences. So that is where I leave this, is trying to encourage us all to do more of that, whether that's in our personal or professional lives. So I appreciate y'all for listening to my TED Talk. And I hope you join us for next month's episode. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.